because she's a bust. She was a horrible pick for the Democratic Party. They drafted her in the first round. She didn't even make it to the second season. They gave her a huge contract, $1 billion, and she messed it off and didn't even make a bunch of babies with it. So she has no money, and she's telling us that we're going to make a statue of you, and maybe at Spencer's. You know, but like, you need to remember that we have all been unburdened by what has been, and what has been is you. There will be no statue. You will be the pun of every VP party. When all the VPs get together, they'll be like, thank God we weren't, you know.
There's a comforting belief that TV debates are carefully managed, polite, and predictable, until one moment cracks that illusion wide open. What if the most awkward silence on television wasn't an accident at all, but a split second when someone said the part out loud that was never meant to be said? Because when Tyrus pushed back on Kamala Harris live on air, the atmosphere shifted. Smiles stiffened, the energy changed, and viewers suddenly realized this wasn't the conversation they were supposed to hear or even notice.
VP Harris, she won't go to the border, probably because she'd rather take the magic school bus to the moon.
You guys are gonna see. You're gonna literally see the craters on the moon with your own eyes.
Oh my goodness.
With your own eyes, I'm telling you, it is gonna be unbelievable.
With your own eyes.
Before we move on, hit that like button and subscribe, because you already know you don't want to miss this one. The funny thing about TV politics is that everyone acts like it's spontaneous while holding onto a script like a life raft. Panels smile on cue, talking points slide across the screen, and everyone carefully steps around the uncomfortable moments as if viewers can't see the routine.
Kat, there's worse things that you can say to people.
Yeah.
But I help people who harm people. God bless, good night, that's my time. You know what happened, Greg? The teleprompter went up and they cheered too long.
Yeah.
And she panicked because all she could remember, she couldn't remember the connection word. So she panicked. This ain't close, I'm telling you.
And for years, that illusion mostly held up, until one moment didn't just shake the table, it flipped it. The cue cards went flying, and the room was left buzzing with a kind of tension you could feel straight through the screen.
Yeah,
You know?
I think, well, first of all, I have to disagree with you. It's not Rocky IV. It's Rocky V, the one we were supposed to not remember. Okay? So that's number one. But other than that, beautiful. They're acting like we haven't known her for the last 4 years or 3. It feels like 50. It really does. It really does. And you could make, now they're making the argument the reason why she was the way she was because she had to lay in the cut so by.
Because what happened wasn't loud in the way people expected. There were no desk-slamming theateristics or over-the-top outrage. Instead, it was something far more dangerous in TV politics, an unscheduled reality check, delivered so calmly that no one could brush it off as a joke.
Why is no one talking about the first time I've ever seen Oprah Winfrey stutter?
Yeah.
She was like, what she wanted to say, remember that stupid you said at the, which, was it the debate or was it the DNC that they drew me out and Stedman's pissed, he was double parked, waiting for this. Like she literally said nothing. She's like, Oprah couldn't, if Oprah can't save you, nobody can save you.
Yeah.
I mean,
It was the kind of moment that makes producers start sweating. Anchors suddenly forget how blinking works, and viewers at home lean forward without even knowing why. Tyrus didn't barge in like a wrecking ball. That's the surprising part. He didn't need to. He stepped into the conversation like someone who'd read the script, noticed a missing page, and decided to ask about it anyway. That confidence comes from years of interviews where the questions are safe, the follow-ups are soft, and the stakes feel comfortably theoretical. This was supposed to be just another one of those appearances. A controlled setting where the message lands exactly where it's meant to, and everyone moves on. But television has a funny habit of ruining expectations when someone refuses to play their assigned role. The confrontation didn't begin with fireworks. It started with a quiet pivot, a moment when the conversation drifted just off the approved path, like a car slowly edging toward the shoulder. Viewers who weren't fully tuned in might have missed it at first. Then the tone changed, not aggressive, not sarcastic, just sharp enough to signal that something different was happening.
she has, and that's a huge positive point there, Greg. You can't ordain yourself great. You can't say you're legendary when the only thing you can say is like you were the first black Indian VP to get $1 billion to get smoked in an election. I'm gonna be honest, I don't want that title.
Yeah.
You know,
and not winning a primary.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, Kennedy, it seems like she's attached to fame.
That's when the tension started to creep in. You could feel it in the pacing, in the slight pause before each response, and in the stiffness that replaced the earlier comfort. This wasn't a hostile ambush. It was worse. It was a challenge that couldn't be brushed off with a rehearsed smile. Tyrus has always existed in a strange space in television politics. He's not someone who fades into the background, and he doesn't soften himself to make others comfortable. But what made this moment land wasn't volume or bravado. Kamala Harris did what experienced politicians do in moments like this. She leaned into composure, calm delivery, steady rhythm, and a confident presence that suggested everything was firmly under control.
She had to watch, and then one day she decided to go down to him and say, hey, it's my time. And he's like, you're right. And he stepped aside, and she's this great, noble person. And you know what? Let's say this is all true. I'm willing to have a restart with Kamala, a complete restart. Maybe I've been wrong. And then we'll watch the next speech, and I'll go, Greg, I'm sorry I wasted your time on the show talking about it. So no matter how you dress that box up in ribbons and sprinkles, when you open it up, it's still full of incompetence.
And to be fair, under normal conditions, that approach works really well. It comforts supporters, irritates critics, and keeps the message neatly in place. But composure only holds when the audience believes the setup is fair. When someone questions the setup itself, calm starts to look less like confidence and more like avoidance. The most interesting part was watching the room react in real time. The anchors, clearly sensing things were slipping off script, tried to guide the conversation back to safer territory. Body language shifted, smiles tightened. An unspoken question lingered in the air. How do we move past this without addressing what just happened? Meanwhile, viewers at home were doing exactly what cable news hates. No rules were broken. No insults were thrown, no voices were raised. And yet it shook the system more than any shouting match ever could, because it revealed just how fragile the usual structure really is.
Mayor Pete is finally going to the Ohio train derailment site tomorrow. I wonder if he'll have an SUV drive him there and then ride the bike the last few blocks. But guess what, Pete? You can finally hand out masks because now they actually need them. Or let's trick Kamala and tell her it's the other Palestine. And maybe then they can get some help. Tell her she can evacuate the residents and lock them up in California. Remember, she was...
Tyrus didn't need to accuse or attack. He just refused to move on. That simple refusal created a strange vacuum. The usual escape routes didn't work. Talking points bounced off. Generalities fell flat. The conversation kept circling back to the same unresolved tension, like a song stuck on a chorus nobody wanted to hear again. Kamala Harris, to her credit, stayed composed the whole time, but even composure has its limits when the real issue isn't being addressed. Suddenly, the illusion cracked, and everyone acted like they never cared how it worked anyway. The network didn't panic, but it didn't relax either. The energy stayed tight, as if everyone was waiting for a reset that never came. The segment ended, but the moment lingered. Awkward, unresolved, following viewers long after the screen cut to commercial. That's why this confrontation mattered more than a dozen viral shouting matches. It reminded everyone that television isn't just about what's said, it's about what's allowed to be said. And when someone steps just outside that line, even for a second, the reaction can be explosive.
I have two thoughts.
Yes.
First thought is, she's on a spectrum. I'm going to pause and wait to see if we're going to keep that in or not tonight, and then I will continue. First of all, she never saw the video.
Yeah.
Okay? That's not someone who describes a video.
Yeah.
That's someone that they handed this to her, and she was like, elephant? Oh, I'll take it from here. And then she...
In the days that followed, the spin machines kicked in. Supporters called it nothing, critics called it a takedown, and everyone else debated tone instead of what was actually said. But beneath all that noise, there was a quieter truth. Something about that exchange felt uncomfortably real, and that kind of discomfort is dangerous for a medium built on comfort. Tyrus didn't win in the usual way, and Kamala Harris didn't lose. What it showed was how rare real friction has become on television and how striking it feels when it finally shows up. There's a reason moments like this stick with people. They remind viewers that behind the polished smiles and scripted lines are real power struggles, real stakes, and real consequences that don't always fit neatly into a segment. And maybe that's why it felt a little forbidden. Like the audience wasn't meant to notice the gap between performance and reality, let alone watch someone point it out live on TV.
There's actually a line for that. No, I think Joe Rogan misread. There was no talking.
Yeah.
Smoke them if you got them. So you smoke some weed, but there'll be no talking. We're just gonna sit and look at each other, and at some point, she's gonna remind you that she's from the middle class.
Yeah.
And you know that she was a prosecutor, but yet we never heard her record, or even a picture or an artist rendering of her doing a cross-examination.
No, there's nothing.
Nothing.
In the end, the eruption wasn't about outrage. It was about exposure. The exposure of a system built on predictability and the chaos that follows when someone refuses to play along. That's what made this confrontation stick. Not the personalities involved, but the realization it triggered. Sometimes the most disruptive move on television isn't shouting louder. It's calmly asking the question everyone else has learned to avoid, and then waiting. Once that question is out there, no amount of smooth segues or polite nods can put it back. And that waiting is what unsettled people the most. Television is designed to move fast, to slip past friction before it hardens into something uncomfortable. When something refuses to behave, it exposes just how much effort goes into keeping everything else in line. Viewers felt it immediately, the subtle tightening in the chest, that strange mix of curiosity and unease, watching something you're not sure you're allowed to see. It wasn't entertainment in the usual sense. It was the thrill of watching a system pause, even briefly, under its own weight. And in the aftermath, that feeling only grew stronger.
And she was not drunk. She was hungover, because she's way worse when she's hungover. That was hungover because she kept saying the same thing over and over again. They surrounded, and then they formed a circle, and then they got together. Go the away.
Analysts rushed in to explain what viewers had just witnessed. A classic sign that something slipped past the usual filters. When a moment doesn't matter, it fades away. When it does, it gets buried under explanations, context, and endless debates about tone. Suddenly, attention shifted away from the exchange itself and landed on whether it was appropriate, fair, or productive. That shift alone told the story. Kamala Harris stayed composed, but steadiness can sometimes come across as distance when the ground is shaking underneath. The more controlled the response, the more viewers notice the growing gap between the language of politics and the reality it's meant to reflect. This wasn't a failure of performance. It was a collision of realities. And that collision is what made the moment so replayable, not in the viral outrage sense, but in the way truly uncomfortable truths linger and demand attention.
There's nothing worse than going on, because Joe wasn't always Joe. He was a struggling actor, comedian, trying to find his way, seen some, probably made some bad choices. So he's probably gonna ask some real questions, and that's the last thing that she would want to do, is have a real conversation with someone, because all of her stories are manufactured. Like some of the that she would come up with. Like her mom was like, "Hey, what, did you just fall out of a coconut tree?" And it was...
People watched it again, not to cheer or jeer, but to figure out why it felt off. Why did it feel like something unscripted had slipped through the cracks? The humor, if you could call it that, came from seeing everyone act like this was just another ordinary segment. The show moved on. The network moved on. The news cycle sprinted toward the next shiny distraction. But the audience didn't move on so easily. They had seen the seams. Almost everyone agreed on one thing, even if they didn't say it aloud. That exchange didn't feel like the rest. And that difference is what keeps it alive. It also revealed something usually hidden: the quiet power of simply refusing to let go.
It's also a good way to cover up some really good corruption. because especially we're seeing in this administration where you can put anyone in any job who's not qualified. They just have to meet a certain box. If it's not the color of skin, it's who they sleep with or how they dress. And instead of them having to be qualified, you can just do as many favors as you want for lobbyists and whomever, because if anyone says, well, what are the qualifications? You'll be like, oh, that's racist.
Yeah.
You know, like they need our help to get jobs. They can't do anything without us. And
In a space where conversations are meant to be fleeting, where every uncomfortable thread is quickly dropped for the next segment, persistence becomes its own kind of rebellion. Tyrus didn't shout. He didn't stand up. He just stayed. And that stillness spoke louder than any interruption. For Kamala Harris, the moment was a reminder of the tightrope every high-profile political figure walks on television. Appear too polished, and you seem detached. Appear too reactive, and you feed the narrative you're trying to avoid. It's an impossible balance. Most of the time, the format shields you from facing it head-on. But here, there was no outrage, no applause, just the quiet sense that something important had happened. Something that didn't fit neatly into the usual boxes.
to the side, you know, like literally you can just walk up and pull one out of there, you know, like she was just she lied about everything. So
Yeah.
there's no way she can go on that show.
Jim, it wasn't about that issue. It was about every issue. She can't handle a follow-up question.
Well, it would have been cool if she went on Rogan and she did get stoned. And then maybe she would have revealed something even bigger, like, listen, I didn't want to run for president. I didn't want anything to do with this. I just want.
And maybe that's the most revealing part of all. In an age of constant noise, the moment that stood out wasn't louder than the rest. It was calmer, more deliberate, and more persistent. It showed that the real vulnerability of television politics isn't criticism, it's sincerity. Questions that aren't dressed up in theatrics or hostility, but simply refuse to be brushed aside, cut deeper than any outburst. The eruption wasn't a meltdown. It was a crack, a brief glimpse of how fragile the performance becomes when someone stops playing their role. That's the quiet legacy of this moment. Not a viral win, not a clear loss, but a question that lingers. A question about who really controls the conversation, and what happens when that control slips, even for just a second. And that question is far more unsettling than any on-air confrontation could ever be, because it doesn't end with the segment. It stays with the viewer, quietly, long after the screen goes dark, waiting to be noticed.